6 people buried alive under Mount Maunganui on January 22nd. 5 days under a state of emergency in Otorohanga. Wellington homes losing over $400,000 in value since the peak. And now this. As of October 17, 2025, every single land information memorandum in New Zealand must disclose standardized flood risk ratings. We're not talking about theoretical climate models anymore. We're talking about your property value, your insurance premium, and whether you can actually sell your home when you need to. New Zealand is averaging 56 days per year under states of emergency. That's not a typo. From 2004 to 2014, we averaged 13.4 days annually. Over the next 10 years, that number jumped to 55.9. 2023 hit 91 days. Last year, 72. We've gone from rare crisis to permanent condition, and the property market is finally catching up to that reality. Here's what happened. The Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle in 2023 fundamentally changed how global reinsurers view New Zealand. They stopped treating our natural hazard risk as something spread across the entire insurance pool. Instead, they started getting site-specific and selective. Some risks can be priced. Others are being excluded altogether. Fast forward to January 2026. Between the 15th and 27th, we saw thunderstorms generating over 18,000 lightning strikes in a single day. Tornadoes in Orwa. A 47-year-old swept away crossing the Maharangi River near Warkworth. His body found 3 days later. Towns completely cut off across Northland, Gisborne, and the Coromandel. And then Mount Maunganui, a landslide that buried holiday park cabins, destroyed a toilet block, and killed 6 people, including children. The rescue became a recovery operation on January 24th. Police confirmed no one could have survived. This isn't just about dramatic headlines. It's about the systematic repricing of New Zealand property based on risk that's no longer theoretical. On October 30th, 2025, Earth Science's New Zealand released the country's first ever national flood hazard viewer. It revealed that over 750,000 New Zealanders, 15% of the population, currently live in areas at risk from 1 in 100-year floods. That's $235 billion in building assets. With 3 degrees Celsius of warming, that figure rises to over 900,000 people and $288 billion in exposed assets. Hawke's Bay faces particularly grim projections. Flood exposure jumps from 22% to 31% with just 1 degree of warming, a threshold we could hit as early as 2029. And here's the part one wasn't expecting. The West Coast has the highest exposure nationally, 34% of residents in flood zones. Yet we've seen house prices there surge 35.5% year-on-year to June 2025, from $310,000 to $420,000. That disconnect won't last. So who's affected and how badly? Let's start with the numbers that actually matter to property owners. A Climate Sigma report released January 16, 2025, modeled expected losses to residential homes over the 35 years from 2026 to 2060. By the end of that period, 2,200 properties worth $1.8 billion will have experienced a flood causing at least 80% damage to the house. That's water reaching at least 3 meters above the ground floor. 5,300 homes will experience at least 50% damage, water reaching 1.2 meters above ground floor. And 14,500 properties worth $12.9 billion will experience at least 20% damage, 30 centimeters above ground floor. The biggest number of affected homes is in Auckland, 4,500 properties. But when you look at the worst damage category, 80% destruction, Waikato has the most homes affected. 3 councils dominate the risk exposure: Auckland, Gisborne, and Waikato. Now connect this to the housing market we've been tracking all year. National house values are down 1% annually as of December 2025. Auckland is down 20 to 22% from peak. Wellington close to 30% in some areas. Christchurch is the outlier, up 2.6% in 2025, only down 7.75% from peak. But here's what most people are missing. Those figures represent the crash before climate risk was systematically disclosed. October 17, 2025 changed everything. From that date, all LIM reports must include standardized flood risk ratings, not council-by-council variations. A consistent, Comparable format across the entire country. 219,000 homes are in designated flood zones. $180 billion worth of properties potentially affected. For decades, buyers focused on location, schools, views, and price. Natural hazard risk was background noise. That's over. Insurers are now asking detailed questions. They're not just interested in the address. They want to understand how that specific site behaves under stress. The 4 hazard types driving most decisions are flooding, liquefaction, slope instability, and coastal erosion. And they're assessing frequency, severity, and correlation. Heavy rainfall can cause flooding and slope failure in the same event. Here's what this looks like in practice. Since late 2023, insurance premiums for properties flagged as high flood risk have risen by $500 to $5,000 per year. Excesses commonly double or triple compared to non-risk properties. Some insurers apply higher excesses or reduce flood coverage entirely. Options become limited. Moderate risk properties face premium increases of $300 to $1,500 annually. They may face higher excess levels or specific exclusions. Insurance is generally available, but at increased cost. And lending? Banks are becoming far more selective. Where hazard exposure is evident, they're requiring additional assessments. In some cases, they're declining loans altogether. The market is repricing certainty. Properties with manageable or well-understood risk remain liquid. Those with uncertain or escalating exposure are becoming harder to sell. Studies in New Zealand and Australia show typical reductions of 4 to 10% in sale price for high flood risk homes, with some cases up to 15% depending on market conditions. But the sale price is only part of it. Time to sell for high-risk properties typically increases 20 to 60% compared to regional averages. Real estate agents report buyer interest drops 30 to 50% in flagged flood risk zones. Let me give you a specific example. Wellington City West is down 29.9% from peak. That's over $400,000 lost for the average property owner. Now layer in flood risk disclosure. If you're in a flag zone, you're facing another 4 to 15% haircut on top of the crash you've already experienced. For Auckland, it gets worse. Values are 19.7% below peak overall. But Point England, a former state housing area on high-value land, dropped 33% from its December 2021 peak of $1.46 million down to $978,000 by August 2024. That's $482,000. Values have since rebounded 3.98% to $1.017 million, but there's still more than $400,000 off the peak. Now imagine you're one of the 4,500 Auckland properties identified in the Climate Sigma flood risk modeling. You've already lost equity. Your insurance costs are climbing, and the pool of buyers willing to take on your property just shrank by 30 to 50%. First home buyers have been the one bright spot in this market. They've comprised 28 to 39% of purchases by late 2025, near record levels. They capitalized on flat or declining prices, lower interest rates, and abundant listings. But flood risk disclosure is about to filter their choices. They're looking at the same national flood viewer you are. They're seeing the same LIM reports, and they're making different calculations. Investors are already pulling back. They made 25% of transactions by late 2025, down from 39.5% in 2021. Flood-prone areas will see even less investor activity going forward. So what are people actually considering? This is not financial advice. Always consult a qualified professional before making any property or investment decisions. But here are the 4 strategies informed owners and buyers are exploring right now. Strategy 1. Get the data before you commit. If you're buying, access the Earth Science's New Zealand Flood Hazard Viewer immediately. It's free and publicly accessible. Check your property's flood risk from 1 in 100-year rainfall events. View projected water depths under current climate conditions. See how flood risk changes with 1, 2, and 3 degrees of warming. Cross-reference the national data with your local council flood viewer. Council maps provide property-level precision and local infrastructure details. Then get the LIM report. As of October 17th, all LIMs include standardized flood risk information. Typical cost is $200 to $500 depending on the council. If there's any hazard exposure flagged, commission a full engineering assessment before signing anything. Early clarity is cheaper than late surprises. Some buyers are walking away from deposits rather than proceeding once they see the full risk picture. Strategy 2. If you're selling a flood risk property, price for reality now. Market's price certainty. Your property has already been flagged in the National Viewer and on the LIM. Every potential buyer knows that. Delaying won't change it. Overpricing in hope just extends time to sell. Some vendors are reducing prices 3 to 6% below comparable non-risk properties to compensate for insurance costs and buyer hesitation. Just over half of agents say vendors are holding out for higher prices, but 34% are reducing prices. That 34% are the ones actually transacting. If your property is in a high-risk zone and you need to sell, factor in 4 to 15% reduction depending on severity, plus extended marketing time. The alternative is watching the buyer pool shrink further as insurance becomes harder to obtain. Strategy 3. Retrofit and mitigate if you're staying. For properties with manageable risk, targeted mitigation can reduce both insurance costs and future damage. Raising floor levels, improving drainage, installing flood barriers, and reinforcing foundations all demonstrate proactive risk management to insurers. Some councils offer support for flood mitigation work. Check with your local council about available programs. Engineering assessments typically cost $1,000 to $5,000 depending on complexity. Mitigation work can range from $10,000 for drainage improvements to $100,000 plus for significant structural changes. But here's the calculation. If mitigation reduces your annual insurance premium by $2,000 to $3,000, it can pay for itself over time. More importantly, it keeps your property insurable and saleable. Strategy 4. Diversify out of high-risk areas if you're an investor. If you hold multiple properties and one or more are in flagged flood zones, the portfolio strategy is clear. Reduce concentration in high-risk areas. Sell while there's still a buyer pool. Redeploy capital into regions with lower natural hazard exposure. Southland, Invercargill, and Christchurch have demonstrated relative stability. Christchurch is up 2.6% in 2025 and only down 7.75% from peak. It didn't experience the same boom-bust cycle as Auckland and Wellington, and it has lower flood risk exposure. Queenstown Lakes is up 1.4% quarterly and 16.8% since the January 2022 peak. It reached a new high end of November 2025. Yes, it's expensive, average value $1.86 million. But it's liquid, and it's not sitting in a floodplain. The investors who are staying in flood risk areas are doing it eyes wide open. They're buying at deep discounts, 8 to 12% below comparable properties, and they're factoring in higher insurance, lower rental yields, and eventual exit challenges. That's not speculation. That's distressed asset acquisition. For most investors, the risk-adjusted return no longer justifies the exposure, especially when you consider that we're averaging 56 days per year under states of emergency, and that figure is trending up. So what comes next? The government announced a $2.2 million relief package for flood-hit regions on January 27th. $1.2 million to mayoral relief funds, $1 million to Mary providing welfare support. That's helpful for immediate recovery. It does nothing to address the structural issue. Emergency Management Minister Mark Mitchell said the country seems to be in a perpetual cycle of response and recovery. He's right. We just have to adapt as a society. But adaptation has a price, and that price is being paid by property owners in flood-prone zones. Tauranga Mayor Maha Drysdale confirmed an independent review will take place on the events leading up to the Mount Maunganui landslide. That review will likely find what we already know. The risk was there, the warning signs were there, and the systems we built decades ago aren't adequate for the weather we're experiencing now. The Climate Sigma report modeled risk out to 2060. Between 2026 and 2030, the next 5 years, an estimated 300 to 1,700 properties in flood zones will be damaged by at least one event. The aggregated property value is between $200 million and $1.5 billion. By 2031 to 2035, that increases to 300 to 1,900 properties, with aggregated value between $300 million and nearly $2 billion. This isn't a future problem. It's a present calculation affecting every transaction in the market right now. The property market is still adapting to standardized flood risk disclosure. It's been less than 4 months since the October 17th LIM changes. We haven't seen the full repricing yet, but the direction is clear. Properties with confirmed low flood risk will hold value or potentially benefit from scarcity. Properties with high or uncertain risk will face ongoing pressure. And here's the brutal reality. If you bought in 2021 at the peak, you're already down 15 to 30% depending on location. If your property is now flagged as flood risk, you're facing another 4 to 15% adjustment. Add in higher insurance costs, reduced buyer interest, and longer time to sell, and you're looking at a scenario where some owners are genuinely trapped. They can't afford to sell at current prices because they'd realize a loss that wipes out their deposit and potentially leaves them in negative equity. They can't afford to stay because insurance is becoming prohibitively expensive or unavailable. And they can't get bank financing to move elsewhere because the equity in their current property has evaporated. A Ministry for Environment expert panel warned about exactly this scenario. They described climate change having the power to extinguish the value of people's overpriced and hard-earned homes due to uninsurable flood risks. Thousands could be trapped for a lifetime in dangerous, decaying houses in flood-prone regions, unable to buy a new house in a safe location because no one will buy their old property. No money to move on. Insurance not always available. Mortgages not always available. Wealthy people can afford to pay their way out or wouldn't be living in risky zones in the first place. Low-income people get stuck in a house that progressively decays with each new flood, each cycle of deferred maintenance. That's not speculation. That's the documented outcome in other countries that have faced similar climate-driven property repricing. So here are your 3 key takeaways. 1. 750,000 New Zealanders live in flood-prone areas, with $235 billion in exposed building assets. As of October 17th, that risk is now disclosed on every LIM report using standardized ratings. The market is repricing certainty, and properties with high or uncertain flood risk are facing 4 to 15% value reductions plus extended time to sell. 2. Insurance and lending are becoming site-specific and selective. Premiums for high-risk properties have risen $500 to $5,000 annually since late 2023. Some properties are becoming uninsurable or unfundable. That creates a liquidity trap where owners can't sell and can't afford to stay. 3. We're averaging 56 days per year under states of emergency, up from 13.4 days in the decade to 2014. This is the new baseline. The property market built on the assumption of rare crisis is now operating in a reality of permanent condition. Buyers, sellers, and investors who adjust to that reality first will fare better than those who wait. If you own property in New Zealand, check the National Flood Hazard Viewer this week. Get your LIM report if you haven't seen it since October 17th. And run the numbers on what flood risk means for your insurance, your equity, and your ability to sell when you need to. The market already knows. The question is whether you're pricing that knowledge into your decisions or whether you're waiting for the next state of emergency to force your hand. Drop your questions in the comments. Like and subscribe for the next deep dive. And if this changed how you're thinking about your property, share it with someone who needs to see it. The weather's not getting better, but at least now we know where we stand. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next report.